Hey guys, Loman02. I actually wanted to take the time to kind of highlight a deck that I played against that I thought was pretty cool. And it's a deck that sees some playing like German Highlander, and the deck is Flying Men. So what I'm going to do is review two games that I played against it. Now, the games themselves are not phenomenal because the decks, well, he said he was testing, I said I was testing on this first deck. And then I tried to give him a more favorable match, but kind of had good draws. So the deck I'm playing is a bug deck, and it's very focused at just demolishing like weenie decks, so small end decks. That's why you see cards like Dark Blast that are main deck to deal with small creatures. And it also synergizes well, kind of with our Tarmogoyf, our Liliana, not horribly. So this deck is a bug deck. It is a loam deck as well. It's more controlling in nature, but it does have some mid-range threats in it as well. It does have the top-end finisher in the form of loam plus Merit Lodge recursion. So you see the sequence of plays here. Our opponent plays an unblockable 1/1, so I assume they're on Merfolk, like Fish, or Flying Men. So unblockable threats that are typically one power threats that it seeks to beat you with, horizontal grow style strategy, which I don't think is going to be great because I have Dark Blast, which I also recovered just based on what they first played. Even if it's Merfolk where it's not as good, Dark Blast is still I think going to be fine. Plus, getting the Dark Blast back, it may be slight upside that way. It may be a little bit speculative, but it grows my Tarmogoyf pretty well by bidding two Planeswalkers plus an instant. So I have a 4/5 Tarmogoyf on turn 2. I'm kind of getting a little flooded here, but I do have the Liliana. I have no intentions of pushing it or putting it out in front of a possible Spell Pierce here. So I just go for an attack or counter spell before the Vapor Snag was cast. Just go ahead and recast my Tarmogoyf after Snag and just keep on passing it. If my opponent is happy doing nothing on their mana, then I'll just beat down and not cast my limited amount of spells into their mana. They play out the Scion of Una, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me until I see Mental Misstep, which is still kind of rough for them because at the end of the day, I'll just recurse the Dark Blast back through Dredge. They play a Thought Nibbler, another threat that dies to Dark Blast. So, as you can tell, like the way we've mainboarded this deck to beat up on White Weenie specifically is kind of also benefiting it against Flying Men. Now we have a 5/6 Tarmogoyf, which is growing commiserately with the Dredge effect off Dark Blast. And when my opponent goes ahead and cycles a Miscalc off, which they realize I'm not going to play into their counter magic, even if I am on a more limited hand, they get Biden out, which is pretty good here. But I'm going to essentially eat the free card they get off of it. So I'm going to cast my Liliana, make sure it resolves, kill the Scion, and then delete a card out of their hand. So it basically means Biden just gave them a loot effect. They do go ahead and cast a Metropolis Sprite, and I believe a couple other, small creature. Actually, I'm sorry, Dig Through Time. They dig through time, realize, hey, I can't win here, because I'm just going to make them sack their Metropolis Sprite with Liliana and hit them for 5, and, because they can't play more threats, they go ahead and wrap it up. So I don't think we board very heavily. I think we just bring in our Drop of Honey, which is a board card I'm trying out in this deck, and I've been talking about quite a lot recently in our Discord for this format. So they have another 1/1. Do not Dark Blast this time. We don't. Hopefully, we're not going to get the fabled turn 1. Put in Ninja of the Deep Hours to get a card here, because that would be problematic. We have decided to leave up Spell Snare here, as opposed to Pondering or Brainstorming, but we figure we have a pretty strong second turn play with Sorcery Speed, Brainstorm, and Fetch Land to get rid of some junk. But our hand's not bad. I mean, it's very slow, but once we find a Wrath effect, we should be able to get back in the game as far as tempo goes. My opponent's deck, and the one downside of playing a deck like Flying Men, is that it really doesn't present an extremely fast clock like White Weenie does. So I can deal with getting beat on a little more in this match. They go ahead and Essence Scatter. I actually decide to save this thing. And then I go ahead and ponder. Find the Toxic Deluge, which is one of the cards I was looking for, and then keep the Abrupt Decay to deal with, anything like a favorable winds or something like that. Who knows. They play on Eluder Ilkor. We again get hit. I could go for the Toxic Deluge, but I figure it's going to be very important in my game plan. So if they have a 2-mana counter spell, then it could be bad. Plus, getting Tarmogoyf down here is not horrendous. I can protect it with counter magic, and likewise, I can actually Wrath over the top of it with Toxic Deluge. I go ahead and destroy that because I don't want them to. I do not want them getting into more cards, have more selection, and I continue to opt to leave up the Counter Squall. They go ahead and block here, which tells me they're likely out of gas and they're trying to find more flyers. They do find Fathom Infiltrator, which is a fine little card, but when they go ahead and tap out for this, I recognize that I am most certainly going to go ahead and Wrath over the top of them. So they have a Stitched Drake, and Fathom Fleet, whatever that thing is. I do go ahead and attack here with the Deathrite, kind of shadowing my movement, but if they do go ahead and block the Deathrite on the 3/4 flyer, then I'm going to be able to keep my wall around, which probably isn't that relevant, but the life total is, so I could possibly be at 8 if they had blocked there. I play out the Courser. This Spin Drift Drake is a pretty efficient card, but the not the cumulative upkeep, but the upkeep on it is a little bit newsome to my opponent here. I do find my land, gain an incremental life, which is actually not totally irrelevant here. They're forced to block because we have them on a faster clock than they have us on. I do go ahead and cast out the Eternal Witness, getting back the Toxic Deluge just in case they're running like a True Name Nemesis or something like that is just going to blank my clock. They realize they have nothing they can get and go ahead and wrap it up there. So this deck, I think is pretty well suited to win that matchup. We possibly got beat on by little 1/1s more than we had to. Same matchup. In the second matchup, so here's my thing with fish or with flying men. This is specifically flying men. I've shown you fish matchups in the past where it's been primarily merfolk-based blue aggro decks or aggro control decks. I think these decks are kind of strong in like a blue meta, in like a heavy control meta. However, I think I don't even think it's an absolute win there, so I'm not really a huge fan of these decks. But I do want to show it because I've yet to show any Flying Men decks, or showcase any of them. So I want to showcase my opponent's deck. This hand's pretty good to fight against this style of strategy because I have a turn 1 Force Spike. I can Memory Lapse on turn 2, Snapcaster a 3 with Force Spike, and then get down Jace Architect of Thought. Jace Architect of Thought is kind of what makes this hand come together and is kind of its intermediate or bridging play because it shrinks down most of my opponent's threats to 0 power attackers. They play on a Looter Ilkor. I do go ahead and actually just Force Spike this so I can force my opponent to play around, or I can play around Spell Pierce. So they go ahead and pay it, which makes sense. I mean, if they don't have Spell Pierce, they're going to pay it. If they do, then they may have, a consideration to actually not do that. I go ahead and start clocking with my 2/1, even though it's not really the way this deck wins. They have favorable wins, which is actually very strong and will allow them to start attacking the Jace. One of my ways I intend on winning this is through ultimating the Jace and finding an Elspeth and finding probably like a Treasure Cruiser or Dig Through Time in their deck to just get into more cards. They have Mind Shrieker at this point and Hypnotic Siren, so they've expended their hand, but I do have Search for Iskanta, albeit on a relatively low card count in Graveyard. Find Preordain and Merchant Scroll. Merchant Scroll for Mystical Tutor to find Terminus on their end step. I go ahead and shrink all the attackers, which means my Jace will go to 1 this next turn because of the favorable wins. They do go ahead and play this card out, which is interesting to me. I think they probably want to leave Serendib in their hand, but they may not have understood how this deck actually works, which Mystical Tutor is basically the win con. It's the win con or it's, like ultimate play in tempo, which is what I use it for here. I get Terminus with it as opposed to Entreat, which is how the deck wins games, and just cast Terminus out to eliminate basically all of my opponent's cards. So something like a 7-for-1 or an 8-for-1 right there. Maybe 7-for-1 because the Mystical Tutor did cost a card to use. They do have a Morph, which means at this point, I know they don't have counter magic. I can resolve my Moat, which will hold the Morph back. My guess is it's probably something like that 2/1 that counters non-creature spells or something like that. No, it's just this thing. Not a card I would have remembered. I do as soon as I see it, but it's basically a 1/1 unblockable that can become a 2/2 unblockable with Megamorph. But not a card that really threatens me, especially with Moat in play. And at this point, we've kind of seized control of the game. The game will take a while to play out. Gossamer Phantasm. So as I highlight this game, and like I said, these matchups or these games don't really tend to be that interesting because I just seize control of them in both these games. This match, as you see, this deck, Flying Men, is actually pretty cool because it gets to play a lot of like kind of weirdo cards that you normally don't see. And I don't think it's per se horrendous in like a blue meta because it's not fast, but if the decks you're playing against are not fast, its threats are extremely hard to block, evasive, and cheap. So they get under counter magic. They tend to be kind of like crappy on their own, but altogether they work to present a pretty fast clock. What gives the deck we're playing an edge against it is it's not really looking to block regardless. Although, if it doesn't find, one of its wraths early or find the white sources it needs to cast a wrath early, then it can get into some trouble. And I think if my opponent possibly played it a little bit differently, they probably could have sandbagged some more of their threats in this game and played them out a little more incrementally. The issue you run into with that, though, is that excuse me, none of them are like that great on their own, so they don't really present a fast clock. and someone playing cards like Search for His Kanta or Jace, Architect of Thought, can get into more gas or get into more answers for their gas, and just incrementally chip you out, which is kind of what I do this game. I miss pretty heavily there, but find dig through time for my troubles of missing with Search for His Kanta, which is an extreme rarity in this deck. I think that may be the actual first time I've ever missed with Search for His Kanta in this deck, because it runs literally 3 creatures and everything else other than lands it can find. So we do go ahead and just Supreme Verdict here. Our opponent Vapor Snags, which is okay. I could counter that, but I'm not really so threatened by it that I feel like I need to. They can replay it next turn. They play a Cloudfin Raptor and the Jace's Phantasm. I do go ahead and Cryptic Command this just to get further in my deck and get rid of one of my least efficient counter spells in hand. Well, I guess Condescend's probably less efficient, but I want to leave 2 up there because they still do have 2 cards in hand. I get rid of the Pierce plus the Stoneforge. Stoneforge with the Moat in play doesn't really do much because all it's going to get is Batterskull. I do go ahead and get rid of the Favorable Winds because I figure this is going to support my Jace plan of ultimating Jace. With Jace, it's kind of humorous because Jace is just going to eventually ultimate and get us our win con here. We find Jace, the Mind Sculptor, which is an alternate win con, along with this Elsbeth, which in actuality I probably need to get back in my deck so I can ultimate with the Jace. But because I found it, I just go for it regardless because this thing is essentially like a 3-turn clock. Once it ultimates, it just kills you. Even with Moat. They play a Mausoleum Wanderer, I want to say this card is, a 1/1 that you can sack, can get pumped by other spirits when they enter, and you can sack to force an instant or sorcery spell to cost X more, where X is the power of the Mausoleum Wanderer. Find Snapcaster, have the Personal Tutor, opt to go for Personal Tutor on Entreat the Angels, which is actually just another win con in the deck, and is faster than both of the win cons I currently have in play. What I can do here is complicate at some point in time during their turn or remand to draw into it and cast it on their end step. I do go ahead and do it here. I don't plan on utilizing the Search for the Azcanta, the Sunken Rune here. So I just go ahead and do this for 4 because I figure that presents enough pressure that they're not going to be able to get around it. So this leaves up essentially 2 counter spells. My turn comes. I believe they go ahead and concede it here. Yeah, I just sack this thing to look at their library in an attempt to get the game to end faster, and it does, because if I get to look at their library, then I have more knowledge, and they're probably not winning this one anyways. So Game 2 kind of plays out similarly. I thought this would have been a better matchup for their deck. So my thing is I think these sort of decks struggle, Flying Men specifically. I think they're a meta call. I think they're a predatory deck in nature. I don't think they're a great natural strategy in and of themselves. I could be wrong on that, and I hope anyone who watches this gives it a shot and proves me wrong that these decks should just resolutely beat blue decks, which I'm currently playing. But I don't know if that's exactly true. I'm looking at this matchup now and thinking that hey, this doesn't really. I thought this would have been a better matchup for them, but it really wasn't. Although I do think this is one of the better decks in the format as it stands right now, this control deck I'm playing, especially with sideboards, because you're able to hose out, the decks that beat you, which is the very efficient white weenie decks and the very efficient red deck wins. Probably red deck wins to a higher extent because their threats tend to not be permanent based, which this deck tries to deal with on a multiple for 1 basis to accrue incremental advantage and eventually just seal the game up with overpowering control like you saw in the last game, where really they could do nothing to get out of it. So we're taking a beating in the early game from stuff like Thought Nibblers, Cloudfin Raptors, etc. We go ahead and Wrath here, getting rid of 3 of their cards for 1 of ours. They play out a 2/1 Vaporkin, but I have this Maze of Ith to back up my play there. They do Gush, which is very good for them because they don't really need all their mana, and being able to make a mana off of it and cast 2 threats out in 1 turn kind of nullifies some of the effect of the Maze of Ith. They also get on to Jace's Phantasm, so I'm thinking in my head I'm probably going to have to Wrath again. Now, I could have left up Counter Magic, but I think countering these kind of geekier threats is kind of a weaker play, so I do play the Maze of Ith out there and lose the ability after Muddle the Mixturing on my turn to find Search for His Kanta to counter your spells. But as you can see here, I think Search is going to give us the long-term inevitability in this game because I'll essentially be drawing a card every turn as they will, and I'll be impulsing once a turn on a superior mana situation, which is going to benefit me in the long game. So Search is one of those cards that, in this deck, is just it's actually almost a win con. I mean, it's not. It doesn't kill them, but it just locks games up. The inevitability it provides, especially at this situation. Actually, I have Sung. I'll look at it in a second, though, because I'm recording this video. So Thought Eater, I go ahead and kind of send this. Actually, I kind of just do it to get the counter magic out of their hand because I know my uncounterable Wrath is now gone. I put that in the bin. Find Personal Tutor, which is going to find Terminus, and have 2 counter spells up to defend it on my next turn, and know that I'm not going to die from this attack. So Olmazavith, one of the 2-power attackers, they're on 2 cards. I'm going to be on a flip search for his Kanta because I've made my graveyard size 7 at this point, which means I do not have to bin the Terminus that I found to flip search for his Kanta. So I'm up on mana, up on the ability to impulse every turn, plus, play a card every turn or draw a card every turn. And they're on 2 cards. So we're on equal cards, but I have a very superior mana situation. I believe they play some sort of threat out here. I just go ahead and search for his Kanta to see what my options are going to be. I believe take the Enlightened Tutor, which may seem dubious against Mind Shrieker, because Mind Shrieker can actually eat the top card of my library. But I figure at some point in time I'll find the ability, there we go, Brainstorm, to cause them to confuse the math on Mind Shrieker. Plus, it's probably the most independently most powerful card because it can get me Vidalcan Shackles, which nullifies if they try to overwhelm me with like 3 or 4 threats on Mazavith. Then I can start stealing threats and making unfavorable blocks to exchange the creatures, and then untapping it every turn, and essentially using it as like a recursive Doomblade. We do go ahead and Brainstorm here. Find the Shackles after they tap a little low and cannot leave Mind Shrieker up. Draw the Negate back just to nullify the effect of putting the cards back on top and get rid of the junk that we don't want. Play out the Shackles. At this point, we have fairly firm control of the game. I could go to cast a Jace, Architect of Thought, but I don't really see a point in that. They make a 9/9 out of their Mind Shrieker, which is fine. I mean, they got my Treasure Cruise, which stinks, but I really don't care about losing Treasure Cruise because I kind of have all the cards in the world already. Like, drawing 3 at one point in time is not really, it's good, but it's not fundamentally changing the game state. At this point, I'm really just looking for a way to win because at this point, I don't feel like against this deck I can lose. I find, there we go, dig through time to find a threat is kind of what we're looking at right now. I just go ahead and mana leak this just to get the cards out of their hand, and we find a Spellstutter Sprite in their hand, which counters it. So now we have them hell-bent on cards, which is exactly where we want to be. They attack for some odd reason. I just throw this threat in front of it because I don't care if it doesn't kill their Sprite. I'd rather just at this point in time, reduce their threats. I don't take the Gossamer Phantasm because if I do, it will just die in response. I'd rather just block here. Find Karakas, go ahead and dig through time. I believe find a Wrath of God and a Mystic Confluence. And then I believe we cast the Wrath of God here just to end the game. Well, not end the game, but like they're hellbent. Like there are not draws. They can get him out of this at this point because we have so much inevitability with the counter magic that we have and search for his Kanta, plus, a draw 3, albeit inefficient, and Mystic Confluence that it's going to be very tough for them to do anything of significance here. I mean, they'd have to draw dig through time, and then even that's not good enough because I'll just counter it at that point. This isn't irrelevant because I have Mazavith in play, so I allow it to resolve. I go ahead and untap this, but I don't feel a need to steal their threat because I have Mazavith still, and I'm just basically, again, on the Jace Architect of Thought ultimate plan against their deck because I haven't found a better way to win at this point, and it probably is the best way to win right now that I have available to me. Cast out the Mystic Confluence, draw just a boatload of cards, play out this even though it does nothing right now because I don't want to discard the hand size eventually. And Crucible could be good at some point in the game, although my clock is gone significantly low. Unfortunately, I was jabbering away while I was playing this game and was not managing it extremely well, and I apologize, Ben Kill, for if it seemed like I was slow rolling. I was just, BSing on Discord and not playing as fast as I probably should have. Just get a Treasure Cruise there and then just start casting out these spells that I don't want to discard. I guess I could have discarded Lance there, which probably would have been a better line of play, but I was just hurrying. Discarding takes about as long as casting those spells does, so I didn't want to time out randomly, even though I think it's going to be pretty hard from this point to time out if I'm, just basically plus one-ing Elspeth and attacking every turn, which is kind of what I'm up to. But at this point, you'll note, I'm not, utilizing Search for his content anymore. I'm not, using the Myriad Landscape to increase my virtual card advantage in deck. I just counter this thing with Exclude, because Exclude it can only do that. It can only counter creature spells, and with them Hellbent, I figure it's probably good enough. Draw and treat, don't cast it because I already have a win with Elsbeth. Make these things 3/3 flyers and just smash down for a lot more damage than is required to generate lethal. So that was the series of games we played against Flying Men. And like I said, I didn't do it to really show these games because these games are not the most interesting, or I don't even think they were really that contested. I thought this match may have been, but the issue I see with Flying Men, even though I do think it's a very cool deck, and this is the first time I've seen someone play it in the 100-card format, is that it doesn't present a fast enough clock, and it's also a horizontal grow style deck. So I think, if you maybe pared it down a bit and put more control elements in it, it may be better. But then, why not play Fish? Because Fish's independent threats just tend to be better than Flying Men's independent threats do. But, when you're going for a horizontal grow style strategy and the cards don't really kill them as fast, or they fish a turn slower than White Weenie's cards do, then it kind of leads you to wonder how good you can be against what you're supposed to be good against, which is the blue decks of the format. And then against maybe green decks or something like that, I guess it gives you a lot of evasive attackers, but green decks can gain life. They have bigger creatures that eventually need to force blocks because they just race faster. So I don't know. I think it's very cool to see the deck, and I kind of wanted to highlight it here for Ben Kill because I think it's very cool that he brewed and put it together. It's not the first time I've seen a Flying Men list, and actually I think I have one built. I just kind of came to the same finding that I had here in this set of games, is that it just wasn't quite good enough. I mean, it was a cool deck, but it wasn't quite as good as its other, aggro control brethren, i.e. Fish, if you want to go MonoBlue, Wizards possibly on MonoBlue, which is another deck I have not seen, or if you want to just do the granddaddy of all aggro control decks, I think Jeskai is probably the best. So, interesting set of games, very cool deck, and I hope you guys enjoyed the time getting to highlight it and kind of show you what Flying Men was all about. These other two decks you've seen, Azorius or Esper, Miracle Control here, which again I think is probably the best deck in the format. And then Bug Recycler, as I call it, which is really just a BUGloam deck that's very focused on killing or beating weenie creature strategies, which is going to be a tough matchup for it anyways. Where it's going to tend to shine is against the 4-color, more mid-rangey decks, because it runs a decent bit of counter magic and has some wraths, but mostly it's going to be better dealing with decks that start casting their relevant spells between 2 and 4 as opposed to between 1 and 3. So I hope you guys enjoyed this small set of videos, and I'm going to go ahead and put it up and enjoy. Take care now.